Hi, it's Chris with Implied Music, and today I've got some examples of using non-chord tones in melody. Great melodies have propulsion, they have forward motion, and they get that from non-chord tones, from dissonant tones. That dissonance creates a sense of anticipation, and that's a huge part of telling the story of the song, of the melody. We need those spicy bits in order to have a melody be catchy. Now, we do this sometimes quite academically, and there's very, defined ways to talk about non-chord tones, but also just intuitively. So I'm trying to sort of find a balance between those two things. Don't want to be too academic, but at the same time, I'm really interested in sort of laying it out. So I've got 6 examples and maybe a little review of just what I'm talking about. Let's dive in. I think I do want to do a little review, and we'll just kind of make something up as a way of talking about it. So let's say I have a chord progression here. There's B minor, E minor, D to G. Now I've got a couple of things happening there right away. All those chords are from the G major scale. I sort of now have a set of notes that I think will probably work with that. I suppose I could include a C sharp there if I'd like. It's kind of up in the air. And also within each chord, within each sort of vertical 2 beats or 4 beats, whatever it is, I've got a set of 3 notes. These are simple triads. So the chord tones from that B minor chord could be used to melodicize. I could repeat a note and leap away. Honestly, not a bad melodic choice. But what if I did something a little more exciting? What if I went, I stepped down and then leapt up. Leapt. It was a jump. I went up. And that motion is an example of what we call an escape tone. Cool, right? And it gives me a little more energy. I could also, if I'd like, on that B minor chord, walk from a chord tone through the scale to the next chord tone, etc., etc., and create a whole melody based on just that kind of motion. Let's do a step up and then leap down to the E minor. Step up. The next chord is D. Let's step up and leap down. Passing tone. And now let's enclose this B. So I used that beautiful kind of like escape tone trick. I used passing tones. I used an enclosure. There are lots of great ways to create melodic gestures that have more interest than just repeating tones. Those were all chord tones. It was a boring melody and a kind of an interesting rhythm. Boring melody, though, because it was all chord tones. Don't like boring melodies, want to create a story. Let's go back to the beginning and look at my 6 examples. The first thing we're going to look at is passing tones, the most sort of simple kind of non-chord tones. And so as I move from the F chord to the G chord to the A minor chord in this example, I'll set up a scale that winds up playing chord tones and then non-chord tones heading in a direction. And we actually hear a melody which is basically a scale. Here's the F chord, G, A minor. And apologies to Philip Glass's Akhenaten. I really just lifted this idea from that piece. And we can do the same thing coming down. That scale just moves us forward, doesn't it? You can feel each note sort of leaning into the next. Now, just for relief, the same types of chords from the A major system, F sharp minor. Because the scale is so inevitable, because we hear a scale as having a very solid sort of integral identity, this is a very tranquil sound. We're not really surprised by any of the results. Passing tones will often give us that feeling. It just makes sense. You were on a chord tone, you went up to a non-chord tone, keep going up, get to another chord tone. This is a very inevitable type of thing. Now, you can put another little twist on that by using the escape tone concept. And I'm just going to remind you, we talked about it briefly, but I'll remind you what an escape tone is. When you're on a chord tone, like say this G, and my next chord is going to be B major, say. An escape tone trick is to step in a direction, let's step down, and then leap in the opposite direction to a chord tone. And so I get a kind of it's like a little move that you might do on the football field when you're trying to evade your tackler, right? You fake one way and then go another. And it's an effective technique. You can go up and then leap down. You can step down and then leap up. There's my chord progression of that little minor moment. So we step down, leap up. Step up, leap down. Now, these aren't escape tones because they're just kind of neighbors. But here, step up, leap down. Passing tone, lower neighbor, escape tone. It makes a more interesting melody to use these little head fakes, right? No doubt about it. Non-chord tones can be in the chords themselves. They don't necessarily have to be kind of like melodic tricks, although anytime you have a non-chord tone in a chord, it's going to create a certain energy. Your top line or your singer's going to pick it out, may well decide it has to be part of the melody. One of my favorite tricks is to use suspensions. In the next example, I've prepared some of the suspensions, that is to say they appear in the previous chord. Others, I just let them appear. So this is a chorale chord progression that we used, I think, in the last set of examples around dissonance, basically a C major, A minor thing. And here we're going to kind of feel like it's A. But the suspension where the C sus resolves to C and then the F sus2 resolves to F creates kind of weird non-chord tone energies, dissonances, which I think would show up in a melody that we might write over the top of this. And the suspensions push us forward in that same way, that important way of creating anticipation and then fulfillment. Here's another kind of non-melodic but terrifically useful trick for integrating a non-chord tone into a chord, and it's a simple idea. We've talked about it a lot. The use of a pedal tone, a perseverating note, persevere, a perseverating note that appears as the same pitch in a series of different chords. And that note may sound and feel different depending on how it appears. It can be used melodically to great effect. Rock music uses this all the time. Pop music does. So you see it in classical music as well. It's also a great bass note. It could be on the top or the bottom, anywhere. Here's an E minor progression with a E on the top and bottom. beautiful spooky sound. In this case, the E is dissonant sometimes, but it's beautifully prepared because it's been in everything. It's like a thread that weaves its way through the whole progression and resolving to that A there at the end, so weirdly satisfying. Let's go on. But before we do, I just want to ask that you subscribe to the channel. And I'm also going to ask, leave a comment. I occasionally get these kinds of questions. Do you teach? And of course I do. It's kind of what I'm doing right here. Do you teach privately? Of course I do. But, I live in Northern California, and over Zoom during COVID, man, I taught a lot on video, but it's deeply unsatisfying as a teacher, and I think maybe even as a student. So I don't do that, but I do this. And this is interesting because, while, I'm running the show here doing this, comments and questions within a video or, directed even at, other comments can be really great, not just for me, but for the community of musicians, composers, producers, songwriters, that we now have sort of created here at, well over 60,000 subscribers now, and, maybe several thousand views on a given video. This is much more expansive an idea than I had originally anticipated when I started doing this 3 years ago. And so you may find yourself in a position to ask a question that is, pressing or interesting to you that might be useful to another student, another subscriber. And for me, the great value of this, slightly weird, meta-social environment that we're creating here is the value of a community inquiry. In music, I think the most valuable skill we can cultivate in ourselves is the skill of inquiry, of knowing that I just don't know and trying to dig in and find out. There's going to be somebody out there with an opinion. It may not be the best one in the world, but it's not going to hurt you to hear an opinion. And then there's all this other kinds of music. I love it when people turn me on to things, right? This happens all the time. Could you take a look at this? Well, a lot of the time it's not going to be useful for the channel, but it's always interesting to me. Listen, what we've got here is a little village of music makers, for whatever reason, clustered around the kinds of things that I'm showing and that, we all sort of find interesting, hopefully, and hopefully useful. This is music theory, but it's not classical music theory. It's not academic music theory. I hope it's useful for you as a producer, as a composer. I hope you can get something out of it right now. So subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, leave a question. That's enough talk. Let's go to the next example. I've got two more. All right, you guys have to learn this word, appoggiatura, 2 P's, 2 G's. It's a simple idea. There's the G chord, and I want to get to a chord tone. I'm going to start a melodic tone on the strong beat and then lean into the chord tone. So I'm going to start a dissonant non-chord tone, let's say C sharp on the beat. Did you hear that? That lean from the C sharp gave me a little push. You hear this kind of stuff in ballet music where the melody actually has to have a physical feeling. Appoggiaturas can really make you feel like, whoa, I'm flying. Just for a second, you're not settled because you got this strong beat. Here I'm using a really simple waltz instrumental form so you can hear the beat quite clearly. And that strong beat sort of sets us up for an anticipation of a chord tone, but then you don't give it. Well, here's my example. I mean, that was egregious. Like every strong downbeat had an appoggiatura on it. But I have to say, I like that. It's fun. It's an interesting approach. Okay, so this appoggiatura thing can be extended. And one thing jazz musicians do all the time is something called an enclosure. In my last example, I've got some enclosures. Well, an enclosure melodically is kind of just what it sounds like. So there's a G chord, and my melodic tone is going to be G, and I want to enclose that tone above, below, to the G. I went to a chord tone, but I don't have to. I could, for instance, have decided my melodic tone is A and enclose that. Right? It's not a bad sound. I like scale step above, half step below. The half step leans into the melodic tone in a nice way, but it doesn't have to be that. There's my A melodic tone, enclose to the A. I could easily have played that as G natural though. Right? Sounds nice. I could also do an enclosure below, above. You can do chromatic enclosures. Lots of possibilities. Here's my progression. A flat major, E flat, B flat. It's like a plagal cascade. It's kind of popish, isn't it? Sounds like it could be a Harry Styles melody. And here I just broke out flipping that note up because I like it. Well, listen, you know this, but melody is best when it has shape and color. That shape and color should be kind of mostly intuitive, right? You've got to tell your story, and your story is not best defined by a set of rules, right? However, there are moments when you're writing where I don't know, I can just feel blocked, and I just say I've got like an idea for a contour of a melody, and I understand this chord progression, but it's great to be able to reach up on the shelf and say, I'm going to try an escape tone trick on this melody just to give myself a little extra oomph. You'll get somewhere that you hadn't necessarily anticipated. Your ear will be stimulated, your imagination sparked. This is what these kinds of guidelines, rules, are great for. And remember, they're observational. We build these rules from stuff that we've seen done in the past. It's descriptive, as someone has said, rather than prescriptive. You don't have to do it this way. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to like my music. You don't have to like anybody's. There's plenty of music. There's plenty of rules to be broken. Hey, I hope this has been useful. As I asked, like and subscribe, ding the bell to be notified when I do my videos. I'll see you guys next time.